You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
All right, everybody, and welcome to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. So, Darryl, it's funny, and this has been going on for at least a month or two, but, the Detroit Institute of Arts is actually hosting Star Wars and the Power of Costume.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Eric and I are, of course, from the Detroit, Michigan metro area. And this is something that we definitely have to go check out, man. I mean, I heard that they have some great exhibits there, from Vader's costumes to all the stuff from Queen Amidala, all her different robes, and the first draft of Chewie's costume and things like that. So.
Yeah, and I think they have Boba Fett's armor there too.
Okay.
And they got, some Stormtrooper stuff. And I mean, it's a pretty expansive exhibit that, I've had a few friends that have gone, and they say that it's really, really, really cool. I've seen some pictures of it, that they posted on various social media sites too. And
yeah, I saw some stuff in the Detroit news, and it's really cool for the city of Detroit. I mean, the Detroit Institute of Arts is one of the mainstays here in the city of Detroit. It's one of our gyms that we have here in the city. It's great artwork, and they have great events there. So it's cool that they actually have something that's actually dedicated to Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars. I mean, I was actually really surprised because, usually it's the Henry Ford that
they usually do stuff like that, yeah. So, yeah, we definitely have to go check that out.
We're going to have to go check it out. And when we do check it out, we will post pictures of it on our Twitter and, Facebook pages so everybody could see and, comment or whatever.
Hopefully no one sees me getting drug out because I tried to put on a Vader helmet.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I mean... Well, that actually brings us to our first segment, the Cantina. It's time to open the Cantina.
Yes, I need a drink.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. Well, I mean, this is where we talk about our general discussion topics. We talk about, Star Wars news that happens. Sometimes the stories could be, maybe a little older or whatever, but it just... there's so much now to talk about when it comes to Star Wars that it would really be hard to do. We would need like a 4-hour show if we were to talk about things every week. And, honestly, there's some weeks where there's a lot that happens and some weeks not that much is happening. So, this week, though, there's been some stuff. First up, we got the Clone Wars is actually returning.
Yeah, I mean, that's exciting news because the Clone Wars is one of the great animated shows that they had out for Star Wars. It introduced us to Ahsoka Tano, and it kind of carried the story of Anakin Skywalker as he, I guess, basically started heading towards the dark side, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the interesting thing, because I remember, so after Episode 3 came out, George Lucas made the announcement there's not going to be any new Star Wars stuff in the, as far as movies go or whatever.
Right.
Now, we knew that he was coming out with an animated series, and then he was talking about a live-action TV show. And I remember, much to our great surprise, that, I think it was like a year later, he announces that the first episode of the Clone Wars is going to be basically like this feature-length movie that was going to be released, and it actually featured the voice of Christopher Lee as Count Dooku, and we were going to be introduced to this new world, and we were excited because we're like, great, we thought that the whole theatrical experience for Star Wars is over, and even though this is going to be a animated TV series, we finally get to experience Star Wars in the theaters again.
Absolutely, yeah, it was cool.
And then we saw the movie.
Yeah, I actually liked the movie, man.
I did, but my biggest problem was Ahsoka. I mean,
yeah,
and it's funny because this is one way where I was right there with most of Star Wars fandom, is that she was so annoying, and I was just like, I almost didn't even watch the show.
Yeah, well, see, for me, it was the opposite because, I actually love the fact that, and it made sense to me. Like, Ahsoka's character made sense because that's what kids are. Like, they're annoying. That's probably why I don't have any. But anyway, but no, I think kids, Ahsoka being a kid, and she's has so many questions, and that's what kids do. They challenge you. They ask you why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? And
but come on, hey, Sky Guy. I mean, it's just like,
yeah.
really? I mean, I'm not saying that she wasn't the typical kid and that they were annoying. I just think that they overdid it a little bit on that. It didn't have to be.
Yeah, some of the dialogue, I will say, some of the dialogue was a bit cheesy.
And it was the movie, because what you're talking about to me was more like what they did in the first season.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though she was still kind of annoying, she wasn't over the top annoying to me, even in the first season.
Mm-hmm.
It was only the movie.
Yeah. I mean, I could kind of see that. I mean, like, she was kind of, but then, Anakin kind of had his own looking at, like, calling her Snips and, all that type of stuff. So it was just kind of building that whole bond in their relationship and setting those boundaries with each other. And, it's just, once again, a kid who has power and they know it and they want to use it, but they just have no control. And that's always the theme that you kind of see in the Star Wars movies, even in the animated series, is that, you always have the young ones who are trying to use their power and they feel like they should be able to do whatever they want to. But I do agree that some of the dialogue with Ahsoka was a bit campy and cheesy, but overall I still enjoyed it. I loved her devotion to Anakin and eventually how their relationship grew throughout the series. So I'm excited to see the continuation of this. So this should be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was really only the movie. I mean, the Clone Wars was a series that actually got significantly better with each passing season.
Absolutely.
Season 2 was a huge leap over 1, 3 was a huge leap over 2, and so on. Mm-hmm. Until by the time they got to season 5, it was such a riveting, crazy good, show.
Yeah.
And I remember when, that was one of the unfortunate casualties of Disney buying Star Wars. Disney buying Star Wars was actually, to me, like the greatest thing in the world. But the only thing that really bummed me out about it was the fact that essentially it wiped out, the Clone Wars series.
Yeah.
Because it was on the Cartoon Network.
Mm-hmm.
And, they did do like a unofficial season 6 that, because they had that Netflix deal, they took what completed episodes they had, and then they had a few that they kind of put together a little bit, and they released that to Netflix. So that way the fans could see at least a little bit of a window as to what a proper season 6 would look like. But we never got one.
Right.
And as an interesting little side note, the Dark Disciple book that I keep raving about
mm-hmm.
was actually based on an unproduced episode of Clone Wars.
Mm.
So now that Clone Wars is coming back in this form, it kind of makes you wonder, what are they going to do? Are they going to take a lot of these unproduced episodes and then just produce them? Are we actually going to get a Dark Disciples episode?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, that's the beauty of it coming back, is that we kind of get to see where they take the story and how they're going to continue that. And that's exciting because, you have great writers, and I just hope it keeps that same energy that we saw from Clone Wars earlier.
Well, I think it will. I think that, Dave Filoni wanted to actually end the series. That was his biggest regret, is that he never got to properly end the series.
Yeah, the way he wanted to.
Much like what he did with Rebels.
Right.
So, yeah, it's really going to be interesting to see, what they do. And it, one of the things that I always thought was cool about the Clone Wars was the fact that it perfectly, even though John Williams wasn't the one that actually did the music for it, it really captured the spirit of his music.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really seamless. Like, if you really don't think about it, you don't notice that it's a different person scoring the music.
Right. And, even to that point, our next thing is that John Williams has made the announcement that episode 9 will be his last Star Wars movie.
Yeah, which is a really bittersweet. Look, the guy's like 80-something years old.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, whether by choice or, not, there is going to be his last movie.
Divine intervention.
Yeah,
That's what we're...
exactly. You know, there is definitely going to be a last Star Wars movie for him. And one can certainly understand why he would make this announcement. But it is bittersweet because even though there are definitely people that, I think could step up to the plate.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, hey, the person that, I forgot his name, but the guy that did the Clone Wars, the guy that did Rebels. Well, actually, it's the same guy.
Even the score for Rogue One was, that was pretty cool.
I really actually like, it's funny because a lot of people complained about that, but I really enjoyed the score in most cases. There might be a piece here and there that I was like, oh, I don't know, this is a little jarring, but yeah, I thought Rogue One was great. I mean, there's definitely, the thing about it is that John Williams laid a template
right
that other composers can follow. And I think that it's been proven in some of the releases that we've had so far that, people can successfully follow that template. Now, that said, when John Williams goes and does another Star Wars film, you're like, oh.
Yeah, that's John Williams.
Yeah, okay, now I understand the difference.
But do you think that, even though this is his last one that he's going to score and compose, do you think Disney is still probably, as the franchise keeps going, do you think they're still going to consult him with like, hey, they might even let him, because let's not forget that he actually wrote, even though somebody else did, the Han Solo movie, the Solo movie, he did write Solo's theme. And there was another thing that he did too, where he was credited. It was another movie series where, they credited, it was Superman 4. In Superman 4, he was credited with doing it, but it was actually another composer that composed some of the music, and then the 3 or 4 songs that John Williams did write for it, he actually conducted it. So, from a certain point of view.
Yeah, that's another one of those from a certain point of view things. So, I mean, it is sad, but at least you can say, okay, for this complete saga, 1 through 9, it's the same composer. And when you really stop and think about the fact that this saga is gone
this long,
yeah, like 40 some years,
yeah,
and it's the same guy,
yeah, it's impressive. And then on top of that, it's not like he's done composing. Period. This is just his last Star Wars movie. Yeah. So I think he's still going to be going on to other projects that we can still hear some of his music.
Well, there's Indiana Jones 5 that they keep threatening to make, and it, he was a composer for that series, so it makes you wonder, okay, is he going to come back for that? But what do you guys think? Do you think that, number one, do you think that this really is John Williams' last? Just because he says it doesn't mean that's going to be the case.
That's true.
So do you think it is going to be his last? And if it is, what are your thoughts? All right, well, now let's talk about our favorite comic series. The comics is something that we've touched upon it in our show so far, but we haven't really talked about the comics that much.
Right.
Now, I mean, I admit, I haven't read every single comic series. And in fact, I've been sort of, like when I was younger, I actually had, so when Empire Strikes Back came out, which was, 1980, shortly before the release, I'm actually surprised they did this. Shortly before the release, Marvel, and I'm going to post this. I have a picture of myself holding the comic as like a 9-10-year-old kid. I'm going to post a picture of that on our page.
You're a young Padawan?
Yes, when I was just a young Padawan. But they released a comic. Basically, it was a comic adaptation of the movie. And it's kind of weird because it was before the movie came out.
That's weird.
Yeah, it is kind of weird.
Because then you're giving away like if that's true, then they're giving away like the biggest reveal, like in almost like cinema history, in a comic book. That
and I'm kind of hoping that it's just my 9 or 10-year-old mind that's getting the timeline mixed up. I've never actually done it before, but I'm going to research that comic book.
Oh, like when it was released?
Yeah, when it was released and like under what circumstances, because it was beautiful. I mean, it was really thick. It wasn't, the original Star Wars, A New Hope, and they released a 2-part large-size comic series.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had this occasionally. They would release these like giant, just like really big coffee table book size comic books.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did was they actually split it into 2 issues. But with Empire Strikes Back, it was just like a single thick. It actually looked like a graphic novel.
Oh, wow.
That's how good the artwork was. And so back then, you know, when Marvel was doing the series, I actually collected various ones. And then I stopped. So like by the time they got into the Dark Horse comics and all that, I wasn't collecting those. So there was a series which I actually just recently got because I recently started subscribing to Comixology.
Mm-hmm.
And Amazon has a little deal with them. So if you're an Amazon Prime member, you actually have, as part of your Prime membership, you have some Comixology privileges. So you can borrow comics, you could do all that stuff. So, you know, if there's anybody out there that didn't know that, if you are a Prime member, you can do this. And that's what I started doing. I started actually borrowing, you know, a lot of these different comics. And then lately I've even gone back to the comics that were released more in like the 90s, the Dark Horse comics, where that's the infamous one where Luke Skywalker turns to the dark side for a little bit, you know, and then he comes back. So comics for Star Wars now, I've seen a resurgence, obviously for 2 reasons. One, because they're releasing new Star Wars movies,
Right.
which is naturally going to lend itself to the whole comics. And then secondly, now the comics are actually canon.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything is canon, so...
Yep, everything is released now.
Yeah, so now everybody is starting to get into this a little bit more. So the comics are even filling it. You know, I almost look at it like there's that whole thing where they say, okay, they put a bunch of rocks in a cup and say, is it full? You know, you go, yeah, it's full. And then they go, oh, yeah? You know, and then they pour like, you know, pebbles in it. And then is it full? And then sand and then water. It's, you know, the point is that there's always stuff they can put in there. Well, that's sort of like what's happening with canon right now. You have the movies, which are filling up a bulk of your canon, and then the novels are kind of filling in a little bit more detail, and then the comics, because they're more serialized, fill in even more.
Right.
So that said, with that super long introduction I just gave about the comic series, what's your favorite? And have you really been keeping up with the comics?
Not as much. I mean, I do try to keep up with a few. Like, I'm a fan of the Vader series.
Yeah, the recent Darth Vader. Now, for anybody that's not really keeping up with this, a couple of years ago, they had the 2015 series. And at the end of all these series, they release like a big collection of them that you can buy. So you can either buy the single issues or then they sort of bundle them into a single
package.
Big book type of thing.
Yeah.
And that series was really good. But yes, this new Darth Vader series that's been out, they are on issue, I think 18 or 19. One of those is about to come out.
Yeah, the Vader one has
maybe
been
17.
cool.
I don't know. I lost track. But man, that one's been, I'd say that's like the best.
Yeah. If you're
Star
a Vader
Wars
fan,
comic.
like you gotta read those.
Yeah.
And then also the Mace Windu one is actually kind of interesting because you kind of see what he's like. You know, you kind of only get a glimpse of him in the prequels, but you kind of get a chance to go on these adventures with Mace Windu, and you kind of get a chance to learn a little bit more about his skill set and how cunning he is as a warrior and how fearless he is as a leader, and how the stormtroopers and everybody loves and respects him because, you know, he's just ready to charge out there on the battlefield, but he's still very strategic in his movements as well and caring for his soldiers. So that's also been a cool one for me.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you're a Mace Windu fan, anybody out there that's a Mace Windu fan, pick up the Dark Disciple novel. Because, you know, it's funny. We always know that Mace, he has somewhat of an interesting relationship with the dark side in a way.
Yeah.
He's not really a dark side guy, but he somewhat embraces elements of it.
Yeah, he taps into it every now and then. He just doesn't go too far.
Yeah. He's not quite as pure about it as Yoda is, where it's like a black and white type of a thing. He's sort of like if he needs to employ certain powers
or tactics,
he'll do it.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing about Mace is that, and that's what kind of sets him apart as one of the leaders on the Jedi Council is that he's a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, he's more like the enforcer. Definitely.
Yeah, and that's why Anakin kind of has a liking to Mace because, he respects Yoda's wisdom, of course, but then Mace is more so a little bit more action oriented. And
I think he relates to him.
Yeah, he can relate to him a lot more. And I think... but, he's not a hothead either.
Right.
It's just that when he needs to be aggressive, he knows when to. And that's something that he was always trying to teach Anakin. And the fact that he's mastered a lot of the different lightsaber styles, which is also cool, too.
Well, and, let's not forget that, there's that infamous duel between him and Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, and
it's epic. It's actually probably my favorite duel.
Yeah, and I often wonder, like, I know in a lot of different, canon, some people will say that, Palpatine was kind of playing weak and allowed Mace to kind of get the upper hand on him. But in some ways, because I know Mace can actually tap into the dark, I wonder if that ever surprised Palpatine. And he was kind of like hoping that Anakin would bail him out. And that was like his last ditch effort. So that scene in Revenge of the Sith where it comes down when, Mace has Palpatine pinned down and is about to make that final blow.
Well, I think, what I think it actually is? I think that what it is that Palpatine saw an opportunity. That, Mace did actually, at one point, start to gain the upper hand. Mm-hmm. And Palpatine probably could have just risen up and, fought back. But when he saw Anakin's conflict, he saw an opportunity there.
Right.
And allowed Mace to,
carry out.
Yeah, to carry out even more. And, even to the point where he's purposely shooting the Force lightning and it's being deflected back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's always one of those questions that I always wondered, if Palpatine was really losing or was he kind of playing possum there? But yeah, those two are my favorite. What about you?
Well, I mean, of course, the Darth Vader comic is, amazing. The Thrawn comic, they have a Thrawn comic series that, so Timothy Zahn actually wrote a brand new novel that's a canon novel for Thrawn.
Right, yeah.
And basically, there's a comic series. It's a 6-part series that is essentially the comic illustrated version of this novel. And of course, the story's a little bit more condensed for a 6-issue comic, but it basically gives you the crux of the whole story. So you get all the information that you need. And it's a very well-written comic series. Of course, the normal Star Wars run, which has been going for 40, 50 issues now. And that's really good. Some of the early Han Solo comics are really good. Really, really surprisingly well written. I haven't cracked into it yet, but I got one of the older editions of the Lando comics. And there's a new one that's out. There's a new comic series featuring the more like the Donald Glover era Lando, the younger Lando. That's out. Oh, what else? What else is out there?
Have you tried the Poe Dameron one?
No, and everybody raves about that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about that, but I haven't picked up Poe yet.
Just like I would like to, I've read an issue or two of the Dr. Aphra comic. She pops up a lot in the Vader series. Mm-hmm. And then, they gave her own comic. And I mean, she's a really cool character, actually. I really enjoy some of these new characters that they're putting in more older canon situations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that gives the kids a chance to kind of do some research and kind of follow up on some of these people because I know like a lot of the younger generation never heard of Thrawn, but we know him because from the Timothy Zahn. I thought that was cool that they gave it back to Timothy Zahn to do the Thrawn book.
Yeah, and that definitely made sense. And I mean, I know a lot of people weren't, there were some people that were a little bit disappointed by it, but I thought that the book was, incredible. It moved really slow for a lot of people, but I thought that really, if you actually understand the storyline, it makes sense that it did that. Now, there's a new Thrawn book coming out. In fact, it might actually be out now. If it isn't out, it's an any day now type of a thing.
Okay.
And, it's dealing with Thrawn and Vader.
Ooh.
Because Thrawn knew Vader when he was Anakin. That was demonstrated in the original Thrawn book, and this one's going to explore that. Mm-hmm. And then, when he's Vader, he knows who he is. He actually is one of the few people that knows him as Anakin Skywalker, and so it's going to deal with that. So I'm really...
Yeah, that should be really good.
Yeah. If I ever finish Last Shot, which, if we're still on Last Shot watch, still haven't finished it, guys. We'll get there. Because that's another thing I wouldn't mind, doing for future episodes. Besides the fact that we're going to bring in some guests every once in a while, either calling in or into the studio, we'll also actually do some reviews.
Yeah.
We'll take one of our things and actually do like a review of a book or a comic or something. But for our last call,
yes,
because the Cantina's about to close.
Yes. Last call for blue milk.
Yeah. If there's a comic series that you would like to see dealing with a specific topic, what would that be? So, like, who would it be based on, and what would you like to see from it?
I think I would like to see one on Palpatine.
You know what? That's going to be mine too.
Yeah, I would love to see one on Palpatine. I would love to see the time period of him as far as honing his dark side abilities and then his rise into politics. Because of course we saw, Phantom Menace, he was just a senator, but then he just started progressively positioning himself into places of authority within certain circles to allow him to eventually become, Chancellor. And then he became, Emperor Palpatine. So I would love to see something on that. I think that's the only other, I think that's the only character I would probably would be interested, because you really don't know that much about him. And
yeah.
I think he's kind of like the Michael Myers. Like, you just don't know why or where it's coming from or what's his end game. So, we kind of knew his end game.
The whole idea is he's like the most evil guy in the galaxy, basically. But it's like, surely he wasn't born that way. So it's like, how did he get to be in that position? And then once he was, and he was trained by Plagueis and all that, it's like, okay, how did that whole thing work? And
right. Yeah,
they could actually do some, of course, like I said, I'd like to see a standalone film be based on Palpatine, but
yeah, could you ever wonder, like, just for a second, like, okay, Palpatine's been this dark side guy probably all of his life, since he was probably found as a kid by some Sith somewhere. Now, Yoda being like the oldest Jedi Master around.
Oh, like, why did he sense him?
Yeah, like, why didn't he ever, like, pick up on, like, okay, like, there's this guy looming around.
Maybe he did. It's a story that's unwritten.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. That's like the perfect, all this stuff is ripe for that. But that wraps up our Cantina segment. So what's our next segment?
Well, our next segment is Duel of the Fates. Today, we're talking about who's the better pilot between Han Solo and Poe Dameron.
Oh, that's a tough one, actually.
It is, because it's not one of those things that, you can, it's really just based on skill.
It's not a philosophical type of a debate. What's interesting about this, at least that we know of, is neither one of them have any, force type abilities or anything.
Nope.
This is very much, if you're going to go into like the DC universe, it's very much a Batman versus Green Arrow type of a thing. It's, you're dealing with two similar,
they're both cocky. They're both, they're both kind of like play the danger role. They take risks. And I guess Poe Dameron is actually, in his era, it's kind of like the Kobe Bryant to like Han Solo's Michael Jordan almost.
Yeah, and I mean, I've long, said ever since The Force Awakens came out that Poe Dameron is the Han Solo of the new era.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's definitely meant to be that character. Of course, he's not exactly like that, and he has he has a little bit of Luke Skywalker in there, actually.
Yeah.
In his personality. But the better pilot, I mean, I'm going to go with Han Solo. I mean, listen, if you guys out there know of any, canon-based evidence.
Yes, it has to be canon-based.
Yeah, but it has to be canon-based. Well, you know what, though? We'll go with I'll tell you what. We'll go with opinion, but if there's some canon-based, evidence to that, just hashtag Star Wars canon, and let us know, because I'd be interested in that. I personally haven't run across any yet.
It may be in the comics that we haven't read.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's not as if. Listen, I haven't even finished Last Shot. Maybe there's something, maybe there's a line in there where he says, man, if only I were as good as Poe or something. I mean, who knows? I mean, like I said, we're super fans of the series, but we haven't had time to consume every little, thing out there. And I mean, I have quite a bit, actually. I even played the Star Wars role-playing game that was similar to like Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, but it was Star Wars themed. A lot of fun. Knights of the Old Republic, favorite, one of my favorite video games of all time.
Battlefront?
Yeah, Battlefront 2. I've been playing that a little bit. So I'm one of those guys that I've dabbled in a little bit into everything, but I just haven't been able to go as deep. But yet I still love Star Wars. I love talking about it. But both Darryl and I really get into the whole, just the minutia of it and the philosophical debates and the discussions. And that's, it's not
the little
so
intrinsic
much,
stuff.
Yeah, it's not so much. I mean, there's those guys. And, if you're out there, bless you, because I know that there's somebody out there listening to us right now that actually, there's some guy, in some scene and, he's like out of focus and you can barely see him, but you can probably recite everything about that guy.
Yep.
But there's that level of devotion that I really respect. But for me, and I know for you too, Darryl, we really get more into
what we can see and what's kind of in the books and the comics, just right there. Yeah, like kind of the overall thing. And, we get into some crazy details and, even things like this, like who's the better pilot? And I mean, because this is one of those things that you can really make the argument either way. I don't necessarily know if the right answers are evenly matched. That's true.
But I'm just looking at, you could take the evidence that you see in books and comics, but let's just explore the movies. There's a lot of things that, I will say this. Han Solo doing what he does with the Falcon is more impressive to me than what Poe does with something as agile as an X-Wing or some of these other things that we've seen him fly.
Right. Okay. Well, I think I will agree with you on this. I think Han definitely is the better pilot. And the reason why I say Han is the better pilot is because, one, to date, at least, never seen Poe fly anything outside of an X-Wing.
Exactly.
But Han, we've seen him, maneuver other ships before. He can work on his own ship. He can he's intimately acquainted with flying, and that's his thing. The fact that, the Kessel Run alone just makes him legendary.
Yeah.
And then when you finally see what the Kessel Run was like in the actual Solo movie, you just kind of wonder if Poe would be able to be that savvy and crafty. And I think that's what makes Han the better pilot, is that he takes risks even more than Poe.
I'll tell you what this is like. And I said this wasn't going to be philosophical because it's all based on skill, blah, 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 whatever. That's what we said. We even said that when we were preparing for the show, but I'm going to have to bring a little bit in it. This is a lot like when people say, who's the better Sith, Darth Maul or Darth Vader? Because even though some of what Maul did looks prettier and looks more difficult or whatever, Vader actually is obviously the most powerful.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that you can use a similar analogy for Han Solo and Poe Dameron, because there's some flashy things that Poe's done. Mm-hmm. But as we pointed out, it's in a more agile ship.
Right.
It's in one type of a situation.
Yeah, he's a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like,
that's actually a good way of,
you're a fighter pilot, like you have one job, essentially. Where you're a smuggler, there's various obstacles that you have to, and then on top of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
You're maneuvering against Star Destroyers. He's
look at what he's done.
Belts. Yep. With a larger ship. And
that's my point, that he's just done more that we've seen. Even when you just take the movies, we've just seen more evidence of things that Han does that, we just haven't seen out of Poe yet.
Yeah, just in his ability to think on the fly. Like, for example, in Empire, when he decided he realized, hey, they're going to catch up with me, so I'm going to just turn the ship around and put all the shields up front. And then he attaches himself to so they couldn't, find him on radar. And then he waited till they dropped, the garbage, and he was just going to float away when they jumped in. Just that type of thought process makes you a better pilot. And the fact that he knows he's constantly tinkering with his ship. He knows how to get the best out of his equipment. It's no different than in video. Like, I used to marvel with you all the time. Just, you're able to do things with equipment that it shouldn't be able to do. But Han's been able to do it. Because he's intimately acquainted with it. Because,
right, he knows the limitations, and he knows how to use each, various kind of ship. Mm-hmm. And, that's something that I think that the Solo movie has filled in more of the gaps accurately.
Right.
Whereas like some of the stuff was based on speculation, but that just strengthens, some of these points that you're making.
Absolutely. Cool.
All right. Well, that closes off our Duel of the Fates. So now we're going to go to our next segment. What's our next segment?
Our next segment is called From a Certain Point of View.
Right. Now, this is where, of course, we discuss a feature topic. Now, right now we're, of course, discussing some of these topics that, we really enjoy, or they're things that we've talked about in the past that, we thought you guys might enjoy the discussion as well. But we want you to participate in the discussion.
Definitely.
So, if, not only do we want you to comment, of course, on all these things and follow us on Twitter, follow us on, Facebook and write in the comments section, but we also want you to suggest future topics. We'll discuss whatever you guys want. We're here for you guys.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Put it all on the table.
What are we doing today?
Well, today, I thought it would be cool if we actually ranked our favorite Star Wars movies.
That's a good idea, because in our, what we call episode 0, unfortunately, in podcasting hosting sites and stuff, they don't let you actually call something 0.
Right.
I tried. I did. I tried. But see, our episode 1, what you guys know as episode 1, is actually what we call episode 0, because that was sort of like us telling you guys, one, why should you even bother listening to our show? Who are we? And, how did we get into Star Wars? What was our origin story?
Exactly.
Well, today, when Darryl and I were talking about all this stuff, he was like, okay, we told everybody about, how we got into it and why we love it and a little bit about who we are. But, it just occurs to us that you guys don't know what our favorite movies are yet.
Yep. Yeah. Everybody has their favorite Star Wars movies, and people have their own ranking as far as, which movies were better. And, I feel like no one's right or wrong because it's your opinion, so, and that's.
Oh, no, you're right or wrong.
I mean, by my standard.
No, but I'll tell you what, we'll end the suspense. You guys have probably been waiting years to hear what our favorite movies are. So.
Yep. Well.
In my mind, anyway.
So who wants to go first?
As if we're like talking to a room full of people. It's a 50-50 shot. You know what? I'll tell you what. I'll take the plunge. I'll go first.
Go ahead.
In fact,
age before beauty.
No. Let's do this. Let's go together. So we could just go like number one. Or here's a question for you. Do you want to start from the bottom or do you want to start from the top?
Let's start from the bottom.
All right.
Started from the bottom. Now we're here. Thanks, Drake.
Okay. So, it's funny. It's going to be interesting because I have a feeling that our lists are going to be very similar. What's going to be very interesting to me is where we differ.
Well, we do have a variable already.
What?
Are we including standalones? Or are we just doing the saga films?
Nah, we got to include the standalones. We said,
favorite films?
We're ranking the films.
Okay. So that includes Solo and Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So my bottom is definitely The Phantom Menace.
I concur.
Now, here's what's interesting. There's a lot of people, out there who I greatly respect who would actually put Attack of the Clones at the bottom.
Mm.
And I do understand that to a degree, but I put Phantom Menace in the bottom mostly because, as I alluded to on our last podcast, Jar Jar, I think, was just a little bit... I understand why he was in there, but I think that he was unnecessarily used in a lot of scenes.
Yeah.
There was a lot of humor in there that just... I mean, it wasn't even that it didn't just need to be there. I mean, for me anyway, you guys might feel differently, but for me, it actually took away from my enjoyment of the story in a lot of scenes.
I liked, and the cool thing is, the reason why Phantom Menace is at the bottom for me is because, yes, Jar Jar, but I also feel Jake Lloyd as Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, that's another good one, too. Yeah,
it's just his dialogue and just the way he had to play the character. I mean, I feel sorry for Jake. I know he's taken some shots over the years.
Well, and he's another one. Yeah, his life has just been essentially ruined because of the whole experience. And, you almost feel bad because this is a human being we're talking about here, and it's like... He
played a role.
He played a role, and he was a little kid. and he actually played it the way he was probably told, because we all know that George Lucas is not exactly an actor's director.
No, he's a great storyteller, but...
Somebody actually once said recently that if Lucas had had his way, he would have had no dialogue and just music, and, it would have been like a silent film almost.
Right.
And he's terrible with dialogue, and, and so that this happened. But at the same time, as a fan, though, you have to go by what's up there.
Yeah. So, and then also I feel like Darth Maul, I think that he was one of the best characters just because he looked the coolest and he did some really cool things, and he brought an element to the Star Wars universe that we've never seen before. But at the same time, with him having so little dialogue, you really didn't get a chance to really know Maul. And that's one of the things that I felt like
some people I think
we lost.
Yeah. Some people think that there's a mystery to it. Going along with what you're saying, I think like Jar Jar was overused. I think Maul and Obi-Wan were underused.
Yeah, and the other thing is we have to bring up the dreaded M word because that screwed up a whole lot of stuff with Star Wars canon too. The whole midichlorian thing.
Yeah, like right out the gate too. The first movie in the new trilogy And now we're getting this sci-fi explanation to basically a fantasy movie.
Right.
You know, completely taking the mysticism out of the Force and making it some sort of a chemical.
Yeah, they're trying to make it too Star Trek-ish. And it's like, just stay in your lane.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, even though it was one of those things that, you know, it's funny because initially I actually liked that explanation.
Yeah.
Because it gave some sort of it gave some, because, you know, the problem with the Force, especially, I think it's less so now because it's becoming more and more defined, but at the time, it was almost like you could just use it as a cop-out, you know, oh, it's the Force, oh, it's this, and you could just put that in there, whereas if you give it the whole midi-chlorian scientific thing, you can explain, you know, some people. But the problem is that it actually took the whole nature of the Force and made it something completely different, to the point that it was starting to negate some of the stuff in the original trilogy.
Yep. So, yeah, I think that's why, that's for me, my main big reasons why 1 is at the bottom.
Yeah, because I actually, you know, a lot of people complain about the politics and all that. I thought it was fine.
No, that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been handled different. You know what? The problem with the prequel trilogy in general, I think, is the execution.
Yeah,
the stories were fantastic.
Absolutely. It's just the execution of it. Okay, so I'm going to go with, well, episode 2.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man.
Episode 2.
Episode 2 is like my second from bottom.
Yeah. Episode 2, I felt like you did get a deeper sense into Anakin, which was cool. I love seeing that conflict within him. I think the coolest thing about that was also finally get to see Yoda do battle. Mm-hmm. That was awesome. Let's see.
Well, episode 2 is another one where it could have been a lot better than it was because it had all the right ingredients.
Yeah, it did. I think it's just based on execution of.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you have some really bad dialogue.
Yeah.
I mean, here you have Natalie Portman, who's like a Oscar-winning actress. Yeah. And, you know, you're giving her these lines that, I mean, they're terrible. But yet they could have handled the whole.
Especially for her to be a queen, this politician.
Yeah, and she's a senator, and that's the thing. It's like she went, and by the way, there is a novel coming out eventually about her. And about how she transitioned from queen to senator. And that's really what's going on here, is the fact that you have all these different elements that are really cool. You know, how her and Anakin fell in love and all that. A lot of that was mishandled.
Yeah.
You actually had another great ingredient where you had a Jedi turned Sith.
Yeah.
You know, which was something from one of our previous podcasts. Somebody had a question. Was it anybody lured to the dark side?
Yep.
You know, besides Vader.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Dooku.
Yeah, Dooku, he becomes Tyrannus, and so now you have this thing where you have a guy who used to be a Jedi, and
Yoda's apprentice at that.
He's Yoda's apprentice. He was also Qui-Gon's master.
Yeah, so that dynamic was cool.
So, you know, and Obi-Wan, of course, being Qui-Gon's apprentice, you know, it's almost like...
Yeah, everything kind of came full circle in a way.
Yeah, and so, I mean, that interaction was cool. You know, and I just thought there was a lot of really good storylines to it, but there is just, once again, it was the execution.
Yeah, I mean, I love the whole vision of Anakin seeing his mother dying.
Yeah,
I love that aspect of a driving force for him.
Oh, when he, you know, slaughtered the Sand People, it's like, you know,
exactly.
You see, oh, yeah, okay, here comes the Vader part.
Yeah, you see that anger. Mm-hmm. And then also, with 2, I think that we could have had a better push with Obi-Wan too. Like I wanted to see more depth in Obi-Wan.
I was hoping to see more of the friendship and the relationship blossoming between Obi-Wan and Anakin.
That and his whole, like, the fact that, okay, his former master is, is like, like this guy, and you just kind of have to figure out, like, okay, well, what made you go here? And even Dooku, I know he was a little bit more kind of a puppet, but I would love to send him because in the Clone Wars cartoon, he was a little bit more ruthless.
Yeah.
And I would have loved to see that element played. And I wanted to see a little bit darker, a little bit more darkness in that Attack of the Clones. And I think the whole Boba Fett as a kid, I really didn't need that.
Yeah, I mean,
I could have dealt with the fact that he was present and Jango was his dad, and we see him like, oh, that's Boba Fett. And then but we just deal with Jango because he's an adult. But it's like showing him and then him picking up his father's helmet. And, it's just kind of like, why is this kid on the battlefield anyway? Like, how did you even get here? Like, is there certain things I was like, I get that he's trying to follow in his father's footsteps and things of that nature. And maybe he hates the Jedi.
I like the visual of the fact that the Jedi are out there and they're doing that, and he's picking up his father's helmet and staring at it. I mean, the visual I thought was really strong, actually. But at the same time, once again, they probably could have had him in a scene or two. Maybe, introduce him in a scene and then, showed him in that context at the Battle of Geonosis, and maybe that was it.
Yeah, that's the whole fire. There he is, Dad.
Yeah,
like, get him. Like, once again, it's almost like a Jake Lloyd thing.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's another. So this is pod racing,
right? Here's another trick. It's just like stop.
I mean, so what would be the next one? I can tell you what mine would be.
The next up the scale.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if he gets it. Like it's a right answer.
Right. After 2, Revenge of the Sith, or
I'm going with Solo.
Solo. You going with Solo?
I'm going with Solo.
Okay. Why Solo?
Well, because if you look at the movies that are left, they're all stronger than Solo, in my opinion. I mean, Solo, once again, it's a movie we didn't need. And there were things about the execution even of Solo. Overall, I liked the movie. I didn't love the movie. And honestly, I think a lot of the fans, really felt that way. I think that in that sense, I'm right there with most of the fandom, in the Star Wars universe, where it was like, it was cool. I enjoyed it. I could see myself watching it, but I only saw it in the theater twice. I didn't even feel the need to go see it
a bunch of times,
6 or 7 times, like I've done virtually every other one.
True.
I
agree with you on that. I think Solo,
when it comes out on Blu-ray, it's like, I'm going to get it eventually, but I don't need to get it right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll agree. I think Solo would be my next one.
I thought that I really would have liked to have seen them, at Beckett for a longer period of time. I thought that they rushed through a lot of things. I mean, again, I thought that the elements were there and I thought it was good. But again, I know there were extenuating circumstances, in this. But you can only go by what's actually there. And as much as I did like the Solo movie, when it stands up against the other movies,
gotcha.
I just can't do it.
Okay. So if you we both agreed for Solo. For me, the next one would be Revenge of the Sith.
Yep. Also, so far, we're just right there.
Yeah, so far. Let's see if we can make it a perfect one. But Yeah, Revenge of the Sith, I think it was really good. I think that we got a chance to see a lot of the humorous side of Obi-Wan and like the brotherhood between Obi-Wan and Anakin.
Yeah, you saw that more, in Revenge of the Sith. The problem was, and this is where the Clone Wars animated series really comes in handy because, and I said this even after seeing Revenge of the Sith, is that you really needed an episode 2.5, which is really what the Clone Wars animated series was all about. But you really needed this because you needed to see that friendship in more situations. Anakin and Obi-Wan in battle together and training together and really forging and developing that friendship. Because without that, you don't really appreciate the breakdown of that friendship that you see in Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
And the problem is, the only reason why you feel any real heartbreak at all, in my opinion, in Revenge of the Sith is just because if you're a Star Wars fan, that these guys were once really best friends. You see elements of that in Attack of the Clones, but not enough, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, it was more like they were still kind of adversarial in a way. But I think, yeah, absolutely. Revenge of the Sith is also great because you see the growth of Anakin. Like, you see him grow as a warrior. Like, he's filled out. He's more confident in himself. His saber skills are, amazing. He's a lot more calm. He's not so hot, not so much of a hothead. Even though that's still there, it's more controlled. It's more controlled, and you can see that. I love the relationship that he had with Palpatine.
That was very much the flip side of the Luke and Yoda, or even Luke and Obi-Wan relationship.
Yeah, and that was cool. And like I said, I just really enjoy more so that aspect of.
Well, and you see everything, breaking down. Everything's falling apart.
Yeah.
And you feel that there's like that eye of the hurricane where everything around you, like things sort of appear normal, but you could see that things are, and there's that point of no return eventually.
Yeah.
The Jedi are on the very last, legs of holding the power that they have and everything's about to come crashing down. And you can feel that slowly happening throughout the movie. And I thought that was done really well. And then, of course, the other thing that I really enjoyed was you got more Palpatine scenes.
Yeah.
And you got to see him being more of a Sith.
And the manipulative side.
Yeah. And he's manipulating, and then he's like kind of turning into, he's sort of like being the Emperor and being Palpatine.
Yeah.
So like Palpatine and Sidious kind of.
Yeah, interchange constantly. Yeah. It's like that dual
and he's
personality.
Giving you more. Yeah. And you're seeing a little bit of a glimpse into what it would be like to be trained as a Sith.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I also loved seeing, you get to understand why Yoda understands not to underestimate the Emperor, because those two actually collide, and you actually get to see
of course,
that.
Yeah, that was something that we have been wanting to see ever since. Yeah. As a little kid, ever since, especially Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was really when it came to a head for all of us. But once Return of the Jedi hit, the big conversation was like, man, what would it be like if like Yoda and the Emperor fought? Mm-hmm. What an epic battle that would be.
Right.
And you get to see it.
Exactly.
And then, of course, you finally get to see the infamous Obi-Wan Anakin battle.
And that was really cool and I love the way that they actually did that, because the choreography of the fight was really cool to me, because you saw the brotherhood even in the fighting style, because they knew each other so well that they mirrored each other. And it's like you would see glimpses where Obi-Wan would be more defensive, where Anakin is more aggressive. But even in that, like, it's like they automatically knew what the other person was thinking. And that's because they spent so much time together. And so I thought that was really cool.
Which, of course, made it for an interesting battle.
Yeah.
And then, one of my other favorite parts is that Jar Jar has no speaking role.
Yes. Amen.
But I mean, and all kidding aside, it was good that he was still there, though.
Yeah, I mean, he's been thus far.
And that's the thing. It's like I'm not necessarily against the character. I just want him used in sparingly and when he needs to be. But the thing that I actually enjoyed about Jar Jar through the whole series is that you actually see him growing.
Yeah.
Like in Attack of the Clones, he's a lot less goofy and silly. He's a little bit more solemn.
Because I think he has the responsibility. He understands.
He's a senator now. He has a responsibility. And by the third one, now he's kind of, he's
almost normal,
consulting with, politicians. And he's kind of a normal guy.
Yeah. So
the Aftermath trilogy, unfortunately. And
yeah. So what do you have after 3?
Well, I'm going to have to say Rogue One. I mean, it was between that and A New Hope.
Okay. Yeah, I would say Rogue One. Just simply because I think it was different. It wasn't a movie about Jedis. It was completely a war movie. And I think that was something different. And that's when you hear Star Wars, I mean, that's you actually get to see the other side of, okay, you're not seeing
well, don't get me wrong. I mean, this is at this point, it's kind of like choosing, your favorite food among your favorite foods. Like if you actually isolated, okay, here's my 10 favorite foods out of every food in the planet Earth. Okay, now rank those.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the elite here.
Yeah.
My reasons, for choosing Rogue One next is only because as much as I love the movie, and I really do, because of I'm so invested in the main storyline. And let's face it, that Darth Vader scene at the end is one of the greatest Star Wars scenes ever. And it really shows you his power. And it's the only time you actually see, the Vader in a suit in his prime.
Yeah.
And I would really like to see stuff that's done shortly after Episode 3.
Exactly. And that's why I was saying, even, about the whole
Lords of the
Sith book, because that's pivotal points, in his development, because we saw him grow as Anakin, but now we're seeing him grow as Vader.
Yeah.
And so now you see how he becomes
a little bit more
feared man in the galaxy, basically.
And it still has a little bit of a tie to the prequels.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to see Vader in that context. And of course, I read the novel Catalyst. Catalyst is the direct prequel to Rogue One. I also read the Rogue One novelization, and that's amazing. Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge fan of Rogue One.
Yeah. Okay. So, after Rogue One, I will go with New Hope.
You go with New Hope. I'm going to have to differ. I'm going to have to say The Last Jedi.
Okay.
Only because, as good as The Last Jedi was, it just... A New Hope is definitely my least favorite of the original trilogy, only because of the fact that, number one, you're being introduced to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So when on repeat viewing, but it's so well executed. Let's not forget it won a boatload of Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
And it is in every essence what Star Wars is about.
Yeah.
So I had to go with Last Jedi because, unlike A New Hope, there's a lot of problems that The Last Jedi has. Again, as much as I enjoy the movie, there's, there are things that, just don't. Now, of course, once you start talking about how, George Lucas monkeyed around with it, with the special editions, even though for the most part, I will say, just a little bit of a note. I think that there's a lot of what he did in the special editions that I thought did add to the movie. And then there were things that, we didn't really need to see. That were just dumb. But yeah, that's the reason why I'm going to go with Last Jedi.
Okay.
So why are you going with A New Hope?
I'm going with A New Hope just because I think it was, like I said, it's the introduction of everybody. I feel like it didn't have as much gravitas to it.
Well, and I definitely understand that because it was definitely, I guess, the lightest weight of all of them.
Yeah, it was kind of like your fun. Yeah, I think it was just kind of like your fun, like kind of cool movie. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I mean, there's some definitely iconic scenes and lines, of course, from that movie that, you and I quote all the time, and I love the movie. But I just felt like it was just kind of like, all right, you really could just kind of like, okay, kind of coast through it, and you just didn't feel a whole lot of angst, I guess, in that movie. Whereas, some of the other ones that are in my list.
Well, I can definitely understand that because there's a lot of comedy, there's some drama, but it's not, it's not super defined. It's almost in a way superficial in that sense, and I can understand why somebody would feel that way. All right, what are you going to go for next?
Following that, I'm going to go with Force Awakens.
Absolutely,
Force Awakens.
Got to go with Force Awakens.
Yep.
Which I should note to you, because if I don't, I'm your friend. I don't. The people listening to this are going to point this out. I'm telling you right now. What they're going to say is somebody's going to write. So let me get this straight. You actually like the copy of A New Hope better than A New Hope. So you're going to have to explain yourself.
Yeah, no. Well, I think that, once again, I think that in 7, it had everything that 4 didn't, and that's what's that more of an angst or that more gravitas. Because when you have, you got Kylo Ren. I mean, and like I said, you have you lose Han Solo, it was that like, man,
yeah,
there you had some moments in that movie where it's just like, yo, it's real. Like Han Solo dies in this movie. You have this guy who
Obi-Wan Kenobi dies, and then again, we haven't had 3 movies to.
Yeah, and that's the thing with.
I mean, we just met him.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just kind of like, all right, he's the old guy, but it's like, Han is like that lovable guy, just like the hero that, is just so lovable, but he's kind of like, well, he's rough around the edges almost. But, and then how he died too. It's not, it's like, okay, granted, Obi-Wan died at the hand of his pupil, but it's like, it's a difference when it's like your kid that kills you.
Yeah.
Like that's somebody that's coming from you that.
I mean, patricide is kind of, that's kind of deep.
Yeah, it's kind of deep. And then.
Much like the wound.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you see the pain that rippled when he died. It wasn't just like, okay, when Obi-Wan died, Luke was just like, oh, crap. He was like, no. But when Han died, I mean, Rey felt it. Chewie felt it. Finn felt like Leia felt it. Like everybody felt when Han died. And then also you have this villain where, of course, Vader hands down is greater than Kylo Ren, obviously. But I think, once again, it introduced Kylo Ren as a different type of guy. And that's when you kind of see his force abilities are different than Vader's. He's not as calm and calculating as Vader. Like Vader kind of like stalked you almost in a way, whereas Kylo is just trying to come at you full speed ahead.
Well, it's like when you're talking about, comparing some of these guys to the horror movie villains, Vader would be Michael Myers.
Exactly.
And then Kylo would be Jason.
Yeah.
And it is one of those things that it's true. I mean, The Force Awakens definitely has a lot of moments in it that are, are very deep and heavy, and especially when you analyze them. And, not to mention the fact that we're familiar with the universe.
Yeah. Also, I would say the comedy is better than 7 than A New Hope to me. Like the comedy between okay, when Kylo shows up, he's like, all right, do I talk? Do you talk? Like, how does this work? That,
yeah. And I mean,
Han
a lot
Solo's comments about, it's like, the blaster, it's like, wow, I got to get one of these, just that type of stuff.
And that could be a wash too, because there's a lot of people that, they really would rather have the humor from the original trilogy more than. I thought that JJ, more than Rian Johnson, actually captured more of the original trilogy humor, yet brought it into. But the thing is, the original trilogy is timeless.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that this current trilogy, it's tough to say. History will tell us for sure, but I don't know, at least thus far, if 7 and 8 are as timeless as 4, 5, and 6.
No. I'm
not even sure that 1, 2, and 3 are as timeless.
No, I mean, I don't think anything will be as timeless as 4, 5, and 6, simply because I think it was all new. And everything is based off of it. So it's just, and it's
well, and every generation almost claims it as its own. So
yeah.
So what's next for you?
So after 7, I'm gonna go with 8. I love.
So you like 8 better than 7?
So I like 8 better than 7? Yes. I like 8 better than 7 because it took Star Wars in a different direction. I love.
Oh man, we're gonna get comments now.
I do. I mean, I think that.
We're gonna get comments because you put The Last Jedi like 2 spots above A New Hope.
Well, yeah, and once again, I think it's because I think it just pushed the envelope. I just think it did things that, I think it had more of a drama to it because of Luke being such the fallen hero. Because he's kind of like, he's kind of like the golden boy. And so it's kind of like to see him kind of like in this sunken place. Oh,
it was definitely a bold move. No doubt about
it. It was just such a bold move on that part. And how he, this girl and his foreign master kind of pulled him out of this. And then, it's this.
In a way, it's actually Luke's redemption story.
Yeah, but then also
it was a different kind than what, Anakin Vader had to go through, but it was very much the same thing. Luke lost his way and he had to find it again.
And like I said, I think even the 8, everything was about growth. Everybody had to grow, from Poe to Rey to Luke to Kylo, everybody had to grow out of what they thought they were.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, like I said, I'm just looking at the depth of it all. I mean, I just feel like 8 was just creative in that manner. So yeah, I'll have to go.
Well, now this is where A New Hope is going to go for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because once again, it really is the one that started them all. and it's the template, and I can still watch it, and it's just as fresh to me now as it was when it came out, and the execution was just so good. And it introduced us to characters that we loved.
Yeah, definitely.
And, because I'm not necessarily going to be one of those guys. There's a lot of people that'll always give it props because of its technical innovations and all that. And that's true. But, at the end, and this would have been true for the first, 10 years, say, of its release. But eventually, at some point, you have to say, at the end of the day, is it a good movie?
Yeah, and hands down, yeah.
And it is. It's, it's fantastic. So that's why, A New Hope, because obviously in my list, I'm just down to the original trilogy at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where it's going to get interesting, because now both of us have the same two movies that are left. Now, of course, I know, after all these years of being your friend.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, it will be followed by Return of the Jedi. Yeah, Return of the Jedi is...
as with me.
Yeah, I think it was super cool. And it's always hard between Return of the Jedi and Empire.
Yeah, because, I'm the same way. Because there are times where I actually am more in the mood to watch Return of the Jedi.
Exactly. And I think... There's a lot of pivotal moments in Empire. I mean, not Empire, but Return of the Jedi, where more especially like when, Luke goes to see Vader and he's like, you know what? Actually, from the time he goes to talk to Leia on through the rest of the movie, it's just like golden to me.
Yeah.
Like everything else before that, don't get me wrong, I loved it because it was like, whoa, like you see how powerful Luke got, so he shows him in the all black and you're like, oh, did he go?
Yeah, he
dark
starts
side
force choking everybody. You're like, okay,
wait a minute,
what's going on?
But then he's got a green lightsaber, so you're like, whoa, okay.
Which is new, yeah.
Yeah, that's new. So I was like, oh, dang. So, he's more confident in everything, and I thought that was cool. His last final conversation with Yoda, I thought that was really.
The only thing that bothered me about, because obviously we're gonna divide this, so you have everything that happened before, the whole Endor thing and stuff like that, and then after, but the biggest gripe that I have, at least in the first act of the whole thing, is just how they handled Boba Fett.
Oh.
Because he was so cool. You look at him in like Empire Strikes Back, and even a couple of, in the special edition of A New Hope, he's just standing there all menacingly. And, even the same thing at first in Return of the Jedi. And then he has this really slapstick, crazy,
like the way
death scene. And it just wasn't befitting the character, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's one reason why I do hope they come out with a Boba Fett, or at least like a
Boba Fett's redemption.
Like a bounty hunter type of a movie where it either talks about, him during the time when he's working with Jabba, or that he actually in canon, because in Legends he did, but in canon he actually escapes the Sarlacc pit.
Right.
That would be nice. But that's the only thing that really bothered me. Everything else, I thought was really, really cool. And I'm the same way, because you saw the Emperor finally. You really got to really see this guy and get to know him.
Mm-hmm. I think from that time, like I said, from the time Luke had that conversation, even when Leia and Han had that little moment out there, because, you kind of saw Han's vulnerability and Leia's vulnerability at that same, like everybody was kind of vulnerable at that one little moment, and then everybody kind of had to go their own path, and no one knew, okay, well, who's coming back from that? And then I think the father-son conversation between Luke and Vader was really cool.
Yeah, that was really dope. Is probably my favorite scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, and then
because that showed Vader's vulnerability.
Yeah.
Which he didn't even really know existed up until that point.
Yeah, just him leaning on that rail and just...
Yeah, and he's conflicted.
Yeah, you can just... You almost say you can see it on his face, even though he's wearing his helmet.
Right, yeah.
But you pretty much can envision what he's like in there. But then one of the parts that always gives me goosebumps is when Luke is hiding in the Emperor's palace from Vader. And, Vader's, talking about, well, if you won't turn, then perhaps she will. The music, that choral thing that's it's very ominous. And then it's like you see these two silhouettes of father and son going at each other. And then Luke getting that angry and then him having to calm himself down. And, just that whole moment of then, of course, when Vader finally just gets tired of seeing his son suffer, that he decides, you know what, I got to do something about it. Yeah, that's that pivotal moment. So, of course, that's always like iconic. But that's why it's hard between Empire and Return of the Jedi for me, because, like you said, it just depends on which you're in the mood for that particular day. But
and that's the thing, and obviously the number one for us then is Empire Strikes Back, and it comes down to this: Empire Strikes Back is just a better movie. Yeah, it's just a better movie. It's better executed. It's just better all the way around.
You had everything in that movie, like from the Leia Han turn in their relationship, like that tension finally broke where they realized, okay,
and that's the first time you really see Han's vulnerability. Like, okay, this guy actually has feelings and he cares, and that added a whole new dimension to his character.
But he cared from the very beginning, though, and that's the cool thing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, this is a little bit, like in the whole New Hope thing when he turned around or whatever. It was like, that was like a little bit more of a on the surface type of thing. Mm-hmm. Where now you're getting into like his actual feelings. Yeah. Now he's kind of falling in love now, so it's a little bit deeper.
Well, yeah, and
you have to explore some more there.
Well, yeah, I think you see more of his feelings because for people in general, like, okay, when he's kind of getting upset, like, what do you mean nobody knows where he is? And he's like, my friend's out there in it. Like, he's loyal at that point to.
Oh yeah, and he's like, he runs out a tauntaun.
Yeah, like he's like, well, it's like,
whatever, go and get it.
I gotta go get my guy, and so that type of emotion and feeling, then even when he comes back, he's typical Han. That's 2 you owe me, Junior. But. Then
it's like when the chips are down, you see his actual feelings, and then he masks it back in his swagger. Yeah, when everything's calm again. And it should also be noted, though, it's the only time in Star Wars history you see him use a lightsaber.
Yes,
that was my favorite character uses a lightsaber. I mean, that just right there. Okay, Empire's my favorite.
Right. End of discussion.
Exactly.
But then you go to the whole. Luke training, and that his growth and like that whole cave situation, like that was creepy to me as a kid. And then of course when you finally see Yoda like pick up the X-wing just almost effortlessly, and then he flies it across the pond, and just that type of stuff. And then you really get to see like Vader was super menacing in Empire.
Yeah,
like his presence, like
he was
scary. From A New Hope, and that's what I'm saying. Like in A New Hope, he was kind of like, oh, he's the bad guy. Empire scares me just because his armor is super shiny. Like his voice is definitely boomier than Empire. I mean, than A New Hope. He's choking people left and right. For failing him.
They probably had a really
irritated.
Yeah, they had a good benefits program in the Empire that because
exactly.
I mean,
accidental choking on the job or something. It's just...
Well, my favorite thing still that one robot chicken.
Oh yeah,
thing where it was kind of like, okay, listen, Vader thinks he has these powers, and if we don't let him believe that he has them, he'll actually lightsaber us, and that thing's real. So just everybody pretend. And
when he chokes you, just fall down, and then
fall down, and then they put a fake mustache on him, and they come back as another admiral or something. I mean, that's hilarious. Yeah. You guys look on YouTube for it. I forgot what they actually title that thing, but it's
a robot chicken though.
Yeah, it's a robot chicken. So just look up robot chicken Star Wars. Maybe we'll actually put a link in the notes.
Yeah, awesome. But I think like Empire on that front, the whole Han, right before he's getting frozen in the carbonite, and Leia tells she loves him. He's like, yeah, no.
Once again, it's Han's swagger versus vulnerability. And let's not forget, you sort of mentioned it, but we meet Yoda for the first time and we find out what he's all about. And we meet Lando.
Yep. They gotta have Lando.
Another, underused in some ways. I mean, it's not so much that he was underused in the movies he was in because he served the purpose. I just wish that there was more, either more movies or more for the character to do. Yeah,
absolutely. And of course, is that, Vader testing Luke, and then, his skill set, how strong is he?
And that's another thing that we wanted to see too. After, all of us little kids in 77 got out of A New Hope, we're like, man, what would it be like if Luke and Vader fought?
Right.
And then we got that.
Yeah. And then he was just, doing, and then the whole scene where, the two little scenes that always freaked me out as a kid is when Vader just comes out of nowhere with the lightsaber and just start hacking away at Luke. Like, he just controlled his breathing and he was just very menacing, like I said, and then him just using the Force and just throwing stuff at him. It's like
you said, he was pretty scary through that whole movie.
Yeah, man, and he was just not playing, and then he lopped off Luke's hand, and then on top of that, after all that, then he tells him he's his dad. Like, really? Like, that's...
Yeah.
So I feel like that was even psychological warfare, like...
Well, and that added to the whole thing of, for a long time, we figured that was just a lie he was telling him to just, just kind of fool him and to, just throw him off.
Yep.
And I mean, we were kind of surprised when Return of the Jedi comes out and you find out, oh, yeah, he really is.
Yeah.
And then once again, well, how does that work?
Exactly.
See, maybe that's why the machete order or whatever it was the way to watch them.
Maybe. But yeah, I think that's, Empire. And then, of course, that's like one of the greatest cliffhangers probably of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And especially for you being history. Back then, like when it actually came out. See, for me, I had the advantage of just putting it in the next tape, but like you had to wait.
Yeah, I had to wait like
4 years, three or 4 years before the next movie.
Yeah, that was
out.
Not fun. And, because kids are notoriously patient. So, yeah, and of course, everybody's arguing. It's good that the internet and all that didn't exist back then because it would have made it worse. But yeah, that was really intriguing. All right, well, that's us ranking the films. So, that ends our from a certain point of view discussion. So our next topic
is to
clear your mind. So yeah, that's our question and answer, where of course you, as our listeners, get to send in your questions to our Twitter at head-to-head-SW or our Facebook. And, we'll answer any questions you have. So we have some good questions today. What's our first question?
Our first question comes from Jim Nye. And the question is, how much longer can Disney go before they saturate the market to the point that people are absolutely sick of the toys in movies?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something that a lot of people actually brought up when Disney first bought them, Lucasfilm, and said, okay, we're going to release a movie every year. So you had, on one hand, people saying like, yeah, this is awesome. We get a movie every year, which is a dream for any Star Wars fan.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, part of what made Star Wars special was the fact that you only got these things once in a while.
Yeah.
And being that they're the ones that invented the whole toy marketing, movie tie-in campaigns and everything, and I think you're seeing a little bit of that now because the Star Wars toys aren't selling as well as they were. And then there was talk where they were even going to release 2 movies a year, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
And they, technically, for all these stories that they want to tell, they almost have to. But, I think, and here's the thing, and I look at it, and there's different schools of thoughts on this, but the Marvel blueprint proves that you can continue to release stuff, and the Marvel universe, in some ways, you can almost argue, is smaller than the Star Wars universe. You know, there's way more stories to tell. And I think that as long as they actually do the movies right, as long as they make good movies that stay true to what is Star Wars to people, which of course is up for debate, I think that they could continue to do them indefinitely, but they have to do it smartly. What do you think?
Oh, man. I mean, it's tough because, I mean, as a Star Wars fan, of course, I want them to keep making them to the end of time, as long as they're good. You know, I think that, you know, one of the things that, you know, me being such a sports fan is that, you know, you want to see your favorite players play forever, but you do have to understand, like, when they start to slow down, you want to see them go out on top. And that's how I feel about Star Wars. I want it to, when it finally is done, I always want it to go out on top. I don't want it to go out like, oh, yeah, it made $20 at the box office.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that, and you brought up Marvel, which in a way, Marvel, the cool thing about Marvel is because it's superheroes. And each generation of kids are always going to love superheroes. They're colorful, they're bright, they have, you know, and everybody gets to play like different. Oh, I'm Thor, I'm Iron Man, I'm the Hulk, I'm, you know, so.
We kind of do that with Star Wars. Well, I'm Luke, I'm Han, you know,
But I think that some people, though, I mean, and that's where I feel like, because Star Wars has a different type of audience than Marvel or like your superheroes. I think they have.
Yeah, but you could say that, like, for instance, look at how long the James Bond series has been going on, and that if you really stop and think about it, that's a very narrow, you know, storytelling, I guess, scope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but Bond is not like Star Wars, though. Like,
no,
don't get me wrong, Bond is iconic.
Nothing is.
But, well, I mean, yeah, but what
maybe that's part of the problem.
And I think that's what I'm saying. I think Star Wars has to live up to Star Wars.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like Star Wars has to live up to itself.
Yeah, and I think it's in this category of its own. But I think it's kind of hard if you start taking and you're adding to these characters. I mean, you're adding stuff that people may not. I always identify with, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the problem. I think it does have a shelf life. I think, you know, and even with the Marvel movies, I mean, I think they're eventually going to have a end game because there's characters that people are just going to lose touch with after a while sometimes. I think that's kind of one of the problems with Star Wars. Like I said, I just want to end on top. I just think that if you get through I think they need to take a break though after 9.
Well, that's the thing that I was going to say. They need to
let it breathe.
Yeah, they need to give everybody a little bit of a break
to digest everything. Yeah,
but again, I honestly think that they could have. As long as the stories are there and that they're good, I think people would accept even 2 movies a year. I think the problem Star Wars is having is the fact that they don't have any kind of a actual plan.
Endgame.
Not even an endgame. They don't even have a plan.
Well, I guess by endgame, I mean like they're working towards like Marvel knew that they were working towards Infinity Wars.
Phase 1 and Phase 2.
Like, yeah, they knew they were working towards.
And that's what Star Wars needs to do. They need to have like a Phase 1, 2. You know, almost like what, you know, I had said at one point where, you know, you have like an endpoint for your next phase, whatever that might be, and then you release a bunch of movies that fit into that. Yeah. And that's the problem. I mean, even when you look at the sequel trilogy of episodes 7, 8, 9, you know, it's almost like every director is left to just do whatever they want. And it would be better if they had a definitive beginning and end. okay, here's where we're starting. Now here's where we got to get to, guys.
Now, to what do you think makes characters memorable? Because I think that's why, like, people latched on, like, because Yoda will always be a favorite, Vader will always be a favorite, you know, Luke Skywalker will always, because they had something that made them, even Han, like they had something that made them memorable. Do you feel like this new crop, if we're looking at, let's just say Finn, Poe,
yeah,
Rey,
I think the characters,
Kylo, like,
I do think that they're memorable. I just think that the problem is that there isn't. You have to remember that in the original trilogy, even though it was a little shaky as far as the outlines, George did have a plan. You know, let's not forget that the Star Wars, that whole long title they had, you know, the Star Wars Legend of the Journal of the Wills or some, I can't even remember the whole title, but it was really long. And he actually had it as like a 6 to 8 hour movie or something.
mm-hmm.
It was one film. And then one of his friends said, no, man, you got to break this up. And then, of course, he wasn't sure he would even be able to fund the whole thing. So he was like, okay, well, which section? And he chose what ended up becoming episode 4 because it had a definitive beginning and end.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was the only movie that was released, it could stand on its own and you wouldn't even need a sequel. So, I mean, George actually had a plan. Now, you can make the arguments as to how much, because, you know, I mean, he had, you know, there were certain characters that changed or whatever when he actually got around to writing the prequels. But he actually had a plan. And that's part of what I think makes a lot of this stuff memorable, is it actually makes sense to people. You know, I don't think necessarily the problem is, because, I mean, let's face it, what makes a character memorable is the writing and the performance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you got to have, the character has to be well written. And then on top of that, you know, it has to be performed well. I mean, it's funny because, you know, when you think of these people that almost got certain roles,
mm-hmm.
and then you can't even imagine those people in that role.
Right.
It's because the actor that actually got it pretty much made it their own, and they brought something to that character. And that's what sticks in people's minds. And so I think that those are the things that you actually have to look at when looking at these characters. And then, you know, consequently, the movies, because the movies really are a reflection of the sum of these characters. So, I mean, from that standpoint, yeah, you know, they can't keep churning these things out and rushing them. You know, so what I think Disney should do at this point is just simply, like you said, take a break, come up with like a 5-year plan, begin making the movies, then start releasing them so they're always 5 years ahead. Not like, okay, we need to release this movie at the end of 2019. We need to start making it in the beginning of 2019. It's like, well, no. You know, a movie that's coming out in 2019, in my opinion, should have been started in 2017.
Right.
And I mean, it was to a degree. I mean, but it, of course, under a different director. But that's the point. Things are just, you know, this is the reason why they're having all these problems with these directors. Yeah, it's kind of like, well, you know, we didn't see eye to eye. And it's like, well, you're halfway through the movie.
Yeah. Now?
Now you're realizing you didn't see eye to eye? Did you not discuss any of this stuff beforehand?
You knew then, and you didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Little Independence Day reference. Yeah, I mean, these are the kinds of things. So as far as Jim's question goes, how much longer can they go? It's not the franchise's fault or anything, or even, it's not even, you know, will people get sick of Star Wars? It's more of, will people get sick of the way Disney's handling Star Wars?
Right.
Well, Disney actually caused people to get sick of Star Wars because the appetite's obviously there. You know, everybody with all this fan division of The Last Jedi, it still made over, you know, like $2 billion.
Mm-hmm. Because everybody wanted to see, because 7 left them on such a cliffhanger And that's what
but the bad buzz was there. I mean, the fan division was there right from the very beginning.
But I think people just wanted to see, like, if it was bad, like, why was it bad? And they still want to see Luke Skywalker. You know what I mean? They wanted to, you got to finish it out now. You know, it's like.
Yeah, well, I mean, but Rogue One made, basically the same, not quite as much money as 7 and 8, but very, very close, like right in there. Solo's the first one that
truly flopped.
Kind of tanked in a way. But I mean, even then you can attribute that to, it was released 4 months after that. And it was also a movie that people weren't really demanding.
Mm-hmm.
Even a lot of the Star Wars commentators were just like, well, this is a movie we really didn't need. I mean, we're going to go see it because we're Star Wars fans, but,
Right.
All right. The next question is actually sort of a 3-part question. It's a question, that's divided into 3 parts. So this one's from Mercedes Doolittle. And it's dealing with the special editions. And this is good. I'm glad this is being brought up because the special editions is another source of tension among fans. People have varying opinions about it. And so her question's sort of in 3 parts because it deals with 3 different elements of the special editions. So she writes, thinking of the special edition changes, was there a change that was essential in forwarding or clarifying the plot more than, but including the Han and Greedo thing? So, I mean, just taking that first. In A New Hope, I do think that there was the Jabba scene.
Yeah, the Jabba.
Now that was for anybody that doesn't really know the history behind it, the Jabba the Hutt Han Solo scene that was in there was actually shot as like a temporary type of a thing. So there was a human actor just like in a kind of like a furry suit or something, and he was basically like a stand-in. Because at first Jabba was actually going to be more of a humanoid character, but then they changed their mind. And then, of course, they didn't really have the tech, but they had shot it as a scene. Well, what George did was he went back in there and then he animated it with the Jabba that we all know. Now, in the first release of the special edition back in 97, it was a terrible, terrible Jabba animation. The CGI was awful. So they went back and fixed it for a re-release. But even that, there was some where I think some people argue that it might not have been as well done. But that I think actually did, because that showed you, Han and Jabba's friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made you feel like, because Jabba was trying to give Han every chance.
Yeah.
Okay, you kind of screwed me over a little bit, but you're kind of my guy, so.
Yeah, it makes Return of the Jedi makes more sense.
Yeah, and even Empire, when he's like, okay, now he has a price on his head, and, you kind of get the idea that, he had dropped a shipment, and he had screwed Jabba over, but you really understand Jabba's reasoning for being upset with that scene. So I think that was definitely a scene that was necessary. I think a lot of the other scenes in the movie, in A New Hope, that they just expanded, like the whole Mos Eisley scene. It gave you more of a feel that it was a really busy.
Yeah, they just expanded the landscape of it all.
Yeah. Made some things. Another one that gave things a little bit more meaning. I think one of the other changes is believe it or not, the Wampa scene in Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, yeah.
I think that gave it a little bit more urgency.
Yeah. Also, I think just the redoing of the Emperor talking to Vader.
Yeah, absolutely. That gave it a lot more continuity.
Yeah. That was
as far as the Han and Greedo thing, that was stupid. I mean, nobody.
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody who's a Star Wars fan who actually thought, you know what? I'm really glad that they They changed that.
They made Greedo shoot first.
Yeah.
Because that was stupid.
And it
takes
looks
away.
bad.
It looks bad, one. And then it's... Because here's the thing. How are you an assassin? Like, that's what Greedo's job was. And you're sitting like a foot and a half away from a guy that you can't hit. Like, really? Like...
That's true.
Like, even if you shot first, like, okay, you would think that he would have hit him.
That makes you a really bad bounty hunter.
Exactly. Like, you're terrible. Like, why would you send him? And then on top of that, like, if you're going to send a bounty hunter after your best guy, who you know is, like, cunning and smart, why not send Boba Fett to begin with?
Well, I don't even necessarily think it was like they sent Greedo. It's like, okay, there's a bounty on Han's
head.
then
Greedo just happened to be there.
Greedo ran into him.
Yeah.
And I mean, but the thing about it is, what irritates me, and I'm sure you guys probably feel the same way, is that it totally it fit Han's character to shoot first like he did. You know, he was cornered and he's kind of like, unclipping his gun from his holster, and then he shoots him. And that actually helped define who Han Solo was.
Yeah, that he was that scoundrel. He was that guy who was like, I'm going to get you before you get me.
Exactly.
He already know what time, like, he knew what time it was. Like, as soon as he saw Greedo, he's like, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
And he knew why he was there.
Yeah.
So he was just like, all right. So he just played it off, and, that's typical Han. And that's what set that tone for,
I mean, I'm trying to remember the stuff in Return of the Jedi. There probably wasn't really anything that jumps out at me that was really 100% necessary.
Although I do agree with my friends over the Jedi Council that I do prefer the original song at the end of the movie.
Yes.
The Nub Nub song, yeah.
Yeah, the Nub Nub song.
I like that better.
But what I did like about that, though, is how they showed the celebrations all around the galaxy. I thought that was good.
I thought that was good because it showed that how everybody was affected by the Empire, and how everybody was relieved that finally, like, this is done with.
Yeah, it expanded things a little bit more. I mean, just like I really wish they hadn't changed the whole Cy Snoodles band scene in Jabba's palace.
Oh, right.
I mean, granted, yeah, the animation was better, but that song...
Yeah, it was terrible.
...was ridiculously bad.
Yeah.
And it just...
It's definitely not going on my playlist tonight.
Yeah, that wasn't really necessary. But, okay, so the second part of this, would it be confusing if different versions were still available? I know that people have made various cuts, but I mean studio release, including the original and special edition. So basically she's saying, like, look... If they released the original theatrical cuts, would it really be that confusing to people if both versions existed? I don't think so.
I wouldn't say so. It wasn't that much of a shift or change in there. I think George just wanted to clean it up a little bit. I think technology got advanced enough where he can go back and fix some things that maybe he didn't like. Because even the one part that they didn't fix, which I thought they would have fixed, was the whole part in A New Hope when, like, Obi-Wan's lightsaber was like went out.
Yeah,
like,
that was bad.
Like, why didn't you fix that?
I'll tell you what, a fan. Did you see that there was a video that I saw on YouTube once? I don't know if I sent it to you or not, but they redid the Vader Obi-Wan fight.
Oh, yeah, that was awesome.
That was amazing.
Yeah, Obi-Wan was actually good with Vader. They should
have dropped that in there because it looked convincing enough.
Oh, yeah, that was great.
I mean, and that's they should have fixed that. I don't think it would, because everybody forgets that Star Wars was an independent film.
Right.
And George Lucas had a particular thing that he wanted to do, that was part of his overall vision, but it was like you said, there were technical limitations that he couldn't do what he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So in order to realize his universe. And the problem is, because he retconned the thing, I think that's why, like, if the technology had existed and he could have just shot it the way he wanted it, I think that it wouldn't have looked as bad in some respects. But there was a lot of parts that, I thought looked good, and we discussed what was necessary. As far as would it be confusing, I don't think it would be confusing, because you just call one the original theatrical cut and the other's a special edition, and everybody understands that.
Right.
Okay, so the final part to this question, thanks to Jim and Mercedes for asking these questions, by the way. Is Lucas I know Disney owns the rights now, but is Lucas justified in only having the official cuts be made commercially available? Comparing that to Ridley Scott's Blade Runner versions, which of course he has a director's cut and then, the original. A lot of people will do that. They'll have a director's cut that there's also a producer's cut too. So for people that's not in the business, a lot of times when they're editing these things, first they do, an editor will actually sometimes have their own cut. This is usually more in television than film, but yeah, the editor's cut, producer's cut, director's cut. But for our purposes, the director's cut is it's the way the director actually wanted the edit to go. Because oftentimes the studio is trying to cut stuff either for content that they don't like, or they want it shorter for time.
Time or money.
And so, what they end up doing is they end up forcing the director, or sometimes an MPAA for ratings. It's like, okay, you want that PG-13? Guess what? You got to cut
this scene, this scene.
Yeah, this scene, that scene. So the director's cut is according to what the director actually envisioned. So, first of all, yeah, it ultimately, it is Lucas's movie.
Yeah.
He's the guy that created it, and he should ultimately have that say.
Yeah, it's his story.
It's his story, and, that's probably not a very popular opinion, but you have to understand that this is the guy that actually created it, wrote it. Yeah, there was a big crew. The movies were out for a while. Everybody got paid. And then he went back in and he did what he wanted to do. Now, granted, we might differ in our opinion. George is an interesting guy. And he's
very intricate.
Yeah, he's just one of those guys that, he's not necessarily, he doesn't think commercially.
Yeah.
A lot of the films he makes are a little out there. Just look at THX 1138. It's different. Yeah, he's made other films that are a little bit more mainstream, like American Graffiti, or, of course, basically producing Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Indiana Jones
right.
movies. And then, of course, there's Red Tails.
Yep.
Excellent movie. But there's that part of him that doesn't think commercially. And he's not always going to do what we think he should do or want to do.
Yeah, and that's the luxury he has of, doing it himself. Is this...
Yeah, now, there's this looming deal with Disney and Fox. So depending on how the whole contract was written, he may actually get, he might not actually be able to stop those movies from being released. But from what I understand, when he sold the company, one of his stipulations was the original theatrical versions are never to be released and the holiday special is never to be released. That's we got to do a holiday special featured topic one day.
That would be cool.
All right, well, that wraps up our show for today, actually. Our questions are done, and
our business being concluded.
Yeah, our business is concluded, and, as usual, we had a great time, talking to you guys about Star Wars, and, please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, contact us at head-to-head SW. Let us know what you think. Submit your questions. Give us some topic ideas.
Yeah, let's see those rankings.
Yeah.
I would love to see you all's rankings.
What are your rankings?
Yeah.
That's a good point. What are your rankings? Let's see how close they are to ours.
I'm sure I'm going to get some backlash, but I'm built for it.
Yeah, The Last Jedi. Yeah, that was brave. You're almost as brave as Rian Johnson is for making that movie.
Exactly.
But that's, you know what? You can handle it.
Yes, I will float right back on in just like Princess Leia.
All right. Well, I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
And this is a Head-to-Head podcast. May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at head-to-head-swpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.